Hello everyone. Since poetry analysis can be a difficult and tricky thing to do and understand, I thought we would take a closer look at a paragraph of poetry analysis I did when I was in a junior English class at UD. Now, I don't want you to be intimidated by the level of observation or vocabulary in this paragraph. What I want you to notice is to look at the structure and the way the paragraph is put together. So just to give you some context, this is the overall thesis statement for the entire paragraph, so you can understand where the paragraph I'm writing fits in, where I'm going with it. And it says, through poetic means, the speaker comes to understand the ends of poetry and its accomplishments, as well as its ultimate limitations. Since the speaker holds poets up to the highest standard possible, God himself, she is able to discover the truly magnificent scope of poetry in spite of its boundaries. So in other words, I'm claiming that this particular poem, which, by the way, is a poem by Emily Dickinson, which are generally known by their first lines because she never titled them, so it's known as I Reckon When I Count It All, that this poem, by comparing poets to God, explores what poetry can do as well as what it can't really do. That's what I'm claiming. Now, what's highlighted in red here is the paragraph we're going to look at is relevant to this particular piece. That's what I'm trying to prove. That's what I'm trying to focus on in the paragraph we're going to look at now. Okay, so here's the beginning of the paragraph. The poem begins with a very surprising sort of list in the first stanza. I reckon when I count it all, first poets, then the sun, then summer, then the heaven of God, and then the list is done. The absolute precedence given to poets initially shocks the reader, since the speaker puts them before even God himself. So here's what we've got here. We've got an introductory line that just brings in and introduces the first 4 lines of the poem, which I quote here. Oftentimes when you're doing poetry analysis, it helps to start with a quotation of a longer piece of the passage, so then that you can talk about very specific pieces and people will know the context of them. However, I wouldn't quote more than 5 to 6 lines at a time, so if you're dealing with a longer passage, say 10 or 12 lines, you should probably break that up into more than one piece. This works here because the whole stanza's only 4 lines. Now, the second sentence after the quotation is basically the claim of the paragraph. It's the topic sentence. The absolute precedence given to poets initially shocks the reader, since the speaker puts them before even God himself. What's highlighted in red is the claim that I am now going to substantiate with analysis in this paragraph. Okay, I can't just say the speaker puts them before God himself. See, you can see it in the poem. My work here is done. I have a whole nother paragraph I have the whole rest of the paragraph to prove, to support that claim through a really close reading of the words that are actually there. You can't just assume that readers are going to see the same thing you see. Next, what we have in orange is in essence a quote. It's a piece of very concrete observation about what's in the poem. Whereas what we have in blue is the explanation. What the blue piece does is it connects the orange piece to the red piece. So we have the explanation, the blue, as a way of saying, look, this orange piece, this concrete thing I've noticed about the poem, supports what I said about the poets being more important than God. So let's look at what we have. The spondee in the first foot of line 2, which is the fancy technical way of saying this double emphasis right at the beginning of the poem, first poets, emphasizes their primary place. While, and here's the second kind of quote and explanation, the repeated then ensures that the reader does not miss the hierarchical nature of the list. Okay, so even though I've got two in one sentence, you can see that I don't just notice something about the poem, like, hey look, there's this double emphasis on first poets. I say, see, that puts poets first, that they're at the beginning of the list. And then the repeated then, so I'm looking at word choice here, and then I say that this ensures that this is a hierarchical list. So I point something out and then I explain how it supports my claim. And then the final sentence sort of wraps this up. Heightening the tension created by the primacy of the poets, the diction of the first line lends cosmic importance to the ordering of the list. So diction is word choice in essence. So this is wrapping up what I just discussed and is leading into what I'm going to discuss next, which is the word choice in the rest of the poem. Okay. This is a comment on the word choice in the first line. I notice reckon, which is the second word of the poem, and I look at two different definitions of the word reckon or reckoning. And then the conclusion is, therefore, the choice of the word reckon indicates that this particular list is not just a collection of random terms, it is a valuation of everything that is important to the speaker. So this is an example of a longer set of quote and explanation. Right? There's two sentences of quotation, basically looking at something specific from the poem, and another entire sentence of explanation, which is different from what we had earlier when it was really only like half a sentence apiece. Okay, so now when you look at the entire paragraph as a whole piece, this is what you get, and I've kind of color-coded it so you can see how it fits together. First, there's an introduction to the quotation, that first sentence. The quotation of the full passage in yellow. Then, every time you see a red line, that's basically a claim. Orange is some kind of specific textual observation. This is your quote. Notice that this isn't always an exact quotation from the poem, but it's some kind of concrete, specific, narrow observation. And every orange quote is always followed by a blue explanation, which is related to the claim. It's explaining how this puts poets first and more important than everything else. And notice that this pattern is repeated at least twice in this paragraph. Now, this paragraph of mine doesn't have a concluding sentence that kind of wraps it up, mainly because there's a whole nother paragraph in the paper about those 4 lines. Your paragraph should probably have a concluding sentence that sort of pairs with or matches the introductory sentence that it has. So you can kind of see the shape of how this works and the level of support that you need to have in order to prove a claim. And that's really what I'm looking for as you write your paragraph about the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Now, I wanted to include some examples of students who are doing a decent job at what I'm asking here from the drafts that were submitted and were due this past Monday that by the way, you should all have received the corrected versions back. So I'm not going to tell you which students these are from, but these are examples that show you how a student in your class can kind of accomplish what I have done, a version of what I have done here. Here's an example of a thesis statement and a topic sentence and what that would look like in this particular paper. Now, I know I said to several of you that you needed to work on developing a good thesis statement and you needed more focused topic sentences. Here's an example of what I mean by this. Here's the thesis statement. T.S. Eliot uses two literary techniques, symbolism and allusion, to describe and display Prufrock's insufficiency of speech around the community of people he has associated himself with. This is not that complicated. It identifies the two different lenses that are going to be used, symbolism and allusion, and it identifies the theme that you're going to be looking at through those lenses, the insufficiency of speech. And that's pretty much it. That's all it really takes. You can try and hone it down a little bit. You can try and point out what's revealed when you look at this theme through these lenses, but those are the basic pieces that need to be there, that you really have to have. Here's an example of a topic sentence from that same paper. In one stanza in particular, notice that we're just focusing on one stanza here. We're just looking at one piece. Eliot uses sudden shifts in language, that is, his diction or choice of words, to communicate Prufrock's indecision. And this is a good thesis statement because it identifies the lens we're going to be using here. In other words, we're going to be looking through the lens of diction at this particular passage, and it points out what that lens reveals. In other words, Prufrock's indecision. These shifts in language communicate Prufrock's indecision. This is a clear claim. I know what lens we're using, and I know what theme it is related to, all in this topic sentence. It's clearly set up to do some in-depth analysis of the diction in this particular passage. So if I told you to improve your topic sentences, this is an example of the kind of topic sentence I'm looking for. Now let's look at some examples of analysis of some students doing this claim, quote, explain structure that I looked at in more detail in my paper. Here's one example. The red, I use the same color scheme. The red is basically making a claim. The orange is some specific quotation or evidence from the paper, and the blue is an explanation. Now, in this one, clearly the structure doesn't quite line up, but all the pieces are there, so it's definitely a good start. Let's take a look at it. An image that helps us understand the kind of life that Prufrock lives. So that's a claim because it's telling us, like, this is what the image does for us. It helps us understand his life. Okay, let's find out some more. Is when he says that he's measured out his life with coffee spoons. That's a specific quotation this student is going to be taking a closer look at. In saying this, he means that he has lived a life of boring routine and nothing interesting. This is still a claim. This isn't an explanation yet because there's nothing necessarily that says coffee spoons mean a life of boring routine and nothing interesting. You're going to need to explain it more to support how this quotation about life with coffee spoons shows that he's lived a life of boring routine. And that's what's in the blue here. And that he has measured all the things that will ever happen in his life. That's pointing you to a specific word. Another point about the image is that coffee spoons are quite small, and for someone who's measured their entire life with such a small unit, it seems to signify that Prufrock thinks he will never do anything big or important, but stay in a life of routine. Okay, so we're coming back to the claim here. The size of the actual coffee spoons is supporting this claim that he feels insignificant and boring. This is a decent analysis, especially for a draft. Okay, one more example before we're finished. Okay. Likewise, when he's describing the night in lines 75 to 54, Prufrock, and here's the claim, gives us the impression of the slothful city and how it is very slow and dull. So that's the claim, okay, that he's using images that give an idea of a slow and dull city. And here's the quotation. The afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired,
or it malingers. And then it kind of continues the quotation by pointing specifically, thus by using the words asleep, tired, and malingers, he sets the picture of dullness and laziness of the trivial city and its inhabitants. So by pointing us to those specific words, say, hey, look, these are words associated with dullness and laziness. That's the explanation. So this has a kind of the more classic claim, quote, explain structure. So hopefully all of these examples, both mine and your fellow students, will help you as you revise your final draft of this paper. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me about them. And as I'll explain in the notes to the homework, if you want more feedback on your paper before you turn in the final draft, just make sure you get it to me with sufficient time so that I have time to look at it and you have time to revise it.